Here we represent atoms using the Bohr model, which assumes that the nucleus is in the middle, which contains positively charged protons and neutral neutrons, and the electrons orbit the nucleus like the planets orbit the Sun. So this is a simplified model that's good for visualizing atoms. Now the force between two charged particles is known as the Coulomb Force, or the electric force, and it's proportional to the product of the magnitudes of the two charges, and inversely proportional to the squared distance between them. So in this hydrogen isotope, or protium, we have opposite charges which attract each other and have a distance of r between them. But in quantum mechanics, the electron is likely to be found somewhere on the sphere, so basically we have an electron cloud, as the electron doesn't remain perfectly at a distance r from the nucleus. And like charges repel each other, so for example these two electrons would experience repulsive Coulomb forces, whereas protons and electrons attract each other, as they have opposite charges. In atoms and ions, the electrons can be visualized as being in shells, or energy levels, which are represented by periods 1 to 7 in the periodic table. And similarly in this energy diagram, up to 7. And these shells or energy levels consist of subshells, which are grouped in blocks in the periodic table. So these are known as the subshells, which are contained in each shell. So at energy level 2, we have S and P subshells. And similarly at energy level 3, in energy level 4, we have S, D, and P subshells. And in each subshell, we have orbitals. So at energy level 2, we have one S orbital and 3 P orbitals. And similarly at energy level 3, and at energy level 4, we have S and P orbitals. But when the d orbitals are filled with electrons, you get more attraction to the nucleus and they drop to energy level 3. As we'll see when we look at electron configurations. So for this example atom using the Bohr model, we have energy level 1 being closest to the nucleus, which has 2 electrons. And then energy level 2 has 3 electrons, which are further from the nucleus. And we'll look at orbitals more closely to see what they actually look like compared to the simplified Bohr model. So here we have 2 core electrons, which are the inner electrons, and 3 valence electrons, or the outer electrons. From quantum mechanics, the actual orbitals in an atom, which are where the electron is most likely to be found, looks different to the Bohr model, where the Bohr model only really represents the shells or energy level, for example in this boron atom. So the energy levels are ordered in the periods from closest to the furthest from the nucleus. So the 1s orbital looks something like this, as a sphere, which surrounds the nucleus of an atom, which I'll represent as a dot. So in the case of boron, 2 electrons are likely to be found in this orbital, around the sphere. And the 2s orbital is also spherical, but further from the nucleus. So again in the case of boron, you have 2 electrons likely to be found in this orbital. And boron also has electrons in the p orbitals. So these p orbitals are 3-dimensional dumbbell shapes and oriented around the nucleus in the x, y, and z directions. And here you have for boron, one electron likely to be found in the horizontal p orbital, and the shapes of these orbitals have been obtained from quantum mechanics. When writing the electron configuration for an atom or an ion, we follow three general principles. And one of them is Aufbau's rule, which states that electrons are placed in shells, subshells and orbitals in order of increasing energy. So in other words, we fill the 1s subshell first, and then a 2s subshell, and so on. And this leads to the second principle, which is Pauli's exclusion principle. Which means that electrons are either spin up or spin down, and therefore one orbital can contain at most 2 electrons. And the next principle is Hund's rule, which basically states that empty orbitals are filled with electrons first. So at the same energy level, we fill the empty orbitals first, and then fill those orbitals with electrons. And again, using Aufbau's principle and Pauli's exclusion principle, we basically just follow the order of this triangle to determine the electron configuration of the elements. So we fill the empty orbitals using Hund's rule, and then apply Aufbau's principle again. So we're just following this triangle, as we can see. And now we fill the d orbitals. So when these orbitals contain electrons, you're going to get pulled towards the nucleus. Then the d orbitals drop to a lower energy level than the 4s. So that's why using this triangle will help us to maintain the correct order of filling the orbitals. So 3d is followed by 4p. And we'll get some practice in applying these rules using examples. Some atoms do not follow Aufbau's rule when we assemble their electrons. And one of those is chromium, and others drawn in lighter colour. So what we do first is assemble the electrons from the lower to the higher energy level. And a number of electrons across each block in the periodic table, so for example the S block, tells us you can only assemble a maximum of 2 electrons in the S subshell. And the P subshell is 6 elements wide, so it takes 6 electrons. And similarly with the D subshell, which takes 10 electrons, and the F subshell takes 14. And let's continue to assemble those electrons from the lowest to the highest energy level. So as we can see for chromium, we have 4 electrons in the D subshell. So therefore this gets attracted to the nucleus, and its energy level drops below that of the 4s subshell. So for chromium, 1 electron from the 4s subshell jumps to the 3d subshell, which is a more stable configuration. And from this you can write the electron configuration for chromium. So you put the subshell down and a number of electrons in a superscript. Let's write the electron configuration for silicon. So using this triangle, we can assemble the electrons in order of increasing energy level. So that's Aufbau's rule. And Pauli's exclusion principle states that electrons are spin up or spin down, so there's a maximum of 2 electrons in each orbital. And Hund's rule states that the electrons are assembled in the empty orbitals first. And we continue this process. until we get to silicon. So the electron configuration is written as follows, with a subshell in the base and a number of electrons in the superscript. Let's write the electron configuration for iron. And as I assemble the electrons, think about Aufbau's rule, Pauli's exclusion principle, and Hund's rule. So now we can write the electron configuration with the subshell in the base and the number of electrons in the superscript. And as we know, the d orbitals get pulled to the nucleus when they're filled with electrons, so they end up having a lower energy level than the 4s orbital. So we basically just swap these around. We can write the electron configuration of the atoms using a shorthand notation or noble gas notation. So for example, for lithium, we have the electron configuration of helium and 1 electron in a 2s subshell. And similarly for boron, we have the following electron configuration. So the electrons in the outer shell of the atom are called the valence electrons, and they're shown here using the Bohr model. Now the ionization energy is the energy required to remove an electron from an atom. And this can be estimated qualitatively using the energy analog of Coulomb's law, which states that the electric potential energy is proportional to the product of the charge of the nucleus and the electron, and inversely proportional to the distance of the electron from the nucleus. So as you can imagine, it's going to be a lot easier to ionize a valence electron, which is farthest from the nucleus. So the Coulombic potential energy is always less than 0, so electrons closer to the nucleus are going to have a lower potential energy than the electrons farther from the nucleus. So to ionize an electron, you need to input energy in the form of electromagnetic radiation to make that electron jump an energy level. So therefore we need to bring the energy of the electron to 0 to eject it. And the energy of the electron is quantized, so the electron exists at specific energy levels. And when the electron emits a photon or loses a specific amount of energy, it jumps down an energy level. So you can imagine it's a lot easier to ionize a valence electron, which is further from the nucleus, than the inner or core electrons. The potential energy of an electron is related to the charge of the nucleus and the charge of the electron, and inversely proportional to the distance of the electron from the nucleus. Now suppose we consider this atom of lithium. Well, the nucleus will attract the valence electron, but the core electrons are going to repel it. So therefore the core electrons are shielding the valence electrons from the nucleus and reducing the effect of the nucleus's charge. So therefore we define the effective nuclear charge as the number of protons in a nucleus minus the shielding constant. And we can use different rules such as Slater's rule to obtain an approximation with the shielding constant, but here we'll simplify this to the shielding electrons being the number of core electrons. So therefore the effective nuclear charge on the valence electron is the number of protons minus the number of core electrons, which is 1. Now suppose here we had a hydrogen atom gaining an electron, and here we have a helium atom, and here we have a lithium atom that's been ionized, so it lost an electron. So therefore we can write the effective nuclear charges on the valence electrons as equal to the number of protons in a nucleus, because there's no core electrons. So therefore the energy that needs to be input to ionize an electron from the lithium ion is going to be the highest among the three.